Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the 2025 Local Government Elections Candidate Information Webinar. My name is Erin Chappel and I am the President of the West Australian Local Government Association, and I'd like to formally acknowledge the Honourable Hannah Beazley, MLA, Minister for Local Government, Disability Services, Volunteering, Youth and Gascoyne. First of all, the Minister's not here currently. There was a misunderstanding about the time we started. The Minister will be here as soon as she can possibly, which hopefully is in the next 20 minutes. But it is my pleasure to host today's webinar on behalf of WALGA in collaboration with our partners, the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety and the West Australian Electoral Commission. We're delighted to have more than 380 participants registered tonight, so thank you for joining us and let's get started. WALGA acknowledges the continuing connection of Aboriginal people to country, culture and community. We embrace the vast Aboriginal cultural diversity throughout Western Australia, including Borroloo, on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people where WALGA is located, and we acknowledge and pay respects to elders past and present. Your interest in becoming a local government elected member is commendable. Considering this step shows a commitment to your community, and we're here to support you as you learn more about what the role involves. I will give you a brief rundown of what to expect this evening. We were going to have the Minister speak first, but she will follow myself or Dennis, whatever time allows. So first of all, I will share some thoughts on why being an elected member is important and how your contribution can make a lasting difference in your community. Then we'll hear from Erin Gauntlett. Erin is the Deputy Director General at the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety, who will outline the Department's role as the regulator of the Local Government Act and key compliance provisions, including the Code of Conduct. Following Erin will be Dennis O'Reilly, the Acting WA Electoral Commissioner, and Phil Richards, Manager of Election Events, who will walk us through the election process and key dates. Then Tony Brown, Executive Director of Member Services at WALGA, will speak on the purpose of local government and the role of elected members. To wrap up this evening's session, we will be hosting a Q&A. So you're welcome to submit your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll address them during the Q&A segment at the end. So if you think of something later, feel free to email your questions to governance@walga.asn.au. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available to local governments to share with the candidates in their communities. We've designed this webinar to run for 90 minutes with concise and focused presentations to ensure we cover all key topics while leaving time for questions. So I will now continue with my notes, seeing as the Minister hasn't arrived. So as someone who has served my community for more than 20 years, I encourage anyone who wants to make a difference to stand for nomination and ensure that you vote in the upcoming local government elections in October. Being elected on council is a privilege. With the 2025 local government elections being held in October, it is great to see so many community members like yourselves interested in running for council. Elected members in local government have a critical role in delivering for grassroots communities. Local government is the closest level of government to the community. Local governments provide critical outcomes every day, including delivering billions of dollars worth of services while employing thousands of Western Australians to service our communities. I was first elected as a councillor at the Shire of Morawa in May 2005. Back then the elections were earlier in the year, and I've had the privilege of serving as the Shire's President since October 2009. Over the years I've learned that the more you invest in this role, the more you gain, not just personally, but in the impact that you can make in your own local community. I fully acknowledge that it takes time to understand the workings of council, and even more time to see long-term change. And a good idea can take years to come to life. I often say it takes at least 4 years from the time you bring something to the table to it actually happens. But that's part of the journey, and it's worth it. The responsibilities of local governments are incredibly wide-ranging. we've moved long past the roads, rates and rubbish stereotype of local government. Local government is so much more than that. Local government is the level of government most accountable to our communities. Local governments build parks, provide amenities, host events, act as community hubs, provide places for people to connect, build major projects, and importantly, we plan for the future needs of our growing communities and make decisions that leave legacies. To be on your council or to undertake a career in local government is to believe in better outcomes for the communities in which you live, for now and into the future. Elected members play a key role in shaping how these services are delivered, ensuring that these services meet the needs and expectations of the communities. Ultimately, our leadership helps create safe, functional and vibrant places where people can live, work and connect. Local government is a constant present in our lives, While things may change, local government remains a steady hand through emergencies, community milestones and the everyday workings of our neighbourhoods. In my time as WALGA President, I've had the privilege of seeing firsthand the depth and breadth of what local governments do and the critical role that council members play in making it all happen. I'm continually impressed by their dedication, leadership and the scope of their responsibilities. I'm proud of the work they do and the outcomes they achieve, especially when it's done in genuine partnership with the community. If you're considering standing for council, I do encourage you to take that step. It is a chance to serve, to lead, and to make a real difference in your community. Your voice matters. And your community needs people who care deeply and are willing to contribute. So now I'm pleased to welcome Erin Gauntlett, Deputy Director General at the Department of Local Government, Industry, Regulation and Safety, who will speak on the role of the department. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Karen. Sorry, I'm just getting some instruction about where I need to sit. And can I use the clicker? Thanks, Karen. Is that all good? Okay. Thanks very much, and it's wonderful to be here to provide an update on the department and our role as we lead into this exciting time for the local government elections in October. Now I'm just making sure okay, great. So before I start, I did want to acknowledge that we're sitting here on Wajak Noongar Butcher, and I know people are sitting on the land of traditional custodians all around the state, so want to pay my respects to the Aboriginal people and elders past and present and emerging across all of the areas and all of the land that everybody's meeting on. I thought I'd start off with a bit of an introduction about the role of our department. For those of you who missed the news flash, on the 31st of March, the Premier Roger Cook MLA announced targeted public sector reforms to better align with the state government's priorities of a more resilient economy and a better way to build. As part of this reform, the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety was established on the 1st of July 2025, which is just over 6 weeks ago now. This new department brings together local government, industry regulation and safety portfolios, centralising the regulatory functions and expertise in the public sector. In terms of our role, so just by way of recap, sorry for people who aren't aware, so when we moved across to the new department, the local government division and the racing, gaming and liquor division came across into the new department. Obviously today I'm very much focused on the role of the local government division, and I'm the Deputy Director General. I sit across both the local government and the racing, gaming and liquor divisions within the department. So in terms of our role, we are dedicated to supporting all 137 local governments across Western Australia and of course the 2 Indian Ocean territories as well. Our key role and focus is to strengthen a responsive and accountable local government sector. And we do this by leading legislative and regulatory reform, building sector capability through targeted programs and support, administering strategic funding initiatives, and collaborating with key stakeholders to enhance governance and deliver sustainable community infrastructure. In terms of the Local Government Act and supporting the regulations to provide the legislative framework that WA's local government sector operates in, we obviously have a central role in that process. So we provide regulatory support and enforcement by fostering best practice, supporting compliance and understanding the challenges that local governments experience. We work constructively with the sector to achieve the following regulatory outcomes. Local governments exercise autonomy while meeting their legislative requirements and community needs. Local governments are complying with their legislative and other requirements. And our regulatory activities support local governments to develop the capacity needed to comply with their legislative requirements. Our activities empower local governments to facilitate positive community outcomes. So, if we move on to the elections and what you need to do to get prepared and our role in that process. There are several things you need to do and consider and do before nominating to become a councillor for local government. Do you want me to?
So, Erin, I think we will
Pause
and bring the minister in.
No, I'm happy to. However, okay. We're going to switch out. I'm just going to kind of exit stage left and welcome the Minister.
Thank you, Erin, and sorry about that. And sorry for being late. There was a diary snafu. So apologies for not knowing exactly where we're at. Karen, have you addressed?
I have welcomed everybody, Minister. I have spoken about my time and what my experiences in local government, and now we're going to hand to you to talk to us about your expectations. So thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm sorry I missed that because I always enjoy hearing your stories and contributions, and make a remarkable WALGA President and Shara President as well. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
But kai everyone, Nagala Karich Nunga Mort Kayan Karak Nijabuja. We acknowledge the Noongar people as the original custodians of this land that we are on tonight, and I pay my respects to Whadjuk Noongar elders past and present, as well as all senior knowledge holders, and acknowledge the strength and resilience of First Nations people and the richness of their diverse cultures. I also pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land from where you may be viewing this webinar this evening. Again, I'd just like to thank and acknowledge President Karen Chappel. Thank you to WALGA for hosting tonight's very important webinar, and I'd also like to acknowledge Dennis O'Reilly, the Acting Commissioner of the Western Australian Electoral Commission, Phil Richards, the Manager of Election Events at the Western Australian Election Commission, Erin, the Deputy Director General, Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety, who very graciously allowed me to disturb her mid-presentation, and all of those presenting tonight. And to everyone joining us, thank you for your interest in running for council in this year's local government elections. Local governments are so important to our quality of life here in Western Australia. They deliver critical services and significant infrastructure and are a major employer and economic contributor in WA, employing over 21,000 West Aussies with a collective annual operating expenditure of around $5.5 billion and controlling assets worth more than $59 billion. It is an incredibly significant sector. Local government is the level of government that is closest to the community, connecting us to our neighbours, our corner shops and the local businesses that enrich our daily lives and make the place we call home unique and special. The services delivered by local governments aren't always flashy, like rubbish removal and road grading, but they are vital to the smooth functioning of our communities and improving our quality of life. However, the services are more than just rates, roads and rubbish. It's also about the facilities where the community gathers and connects, our community centres, libraries, parks, local sporting clubs, public pools and support services. Councillors play a major part in this, representing the interests of their communities and making decisions of the future of their local area. As the member for Victoria Park, I understand what an extraordinary privilege it is to be elected to represent your local community. I was honoured to be reappointed as Minister for Local Government this year and appreciate the relationships I have developed with hard-working and passionate councillors and local government staff from across the sector. As Minister, I have been immensely proud to oversee the implementation of the Cook Labor Government's local government reforms. Our landmark local government reforms are focused on strengthening this vital layer of democracy. We want our councils to better reflect their communities, and that aim is reflected in our reform. The restoration of preferential voting by the Cook Government has been crucial to this, ensuring everyone's vote counts and the people on council represent the views and interests of their communities. Implementing changes that reflect modern workplace and industry practices is another way we are encouraging suitably qualified people from a range of backgrounds to put their hand up to run for council. From 19th of October, local governments will be able to pay superannuation to council members. Individual council members may opt out of these payments if they wish. Importantly, I will shortly announce the appointment of Western Australia's first local government inspector. The inspector will strengthen oversight and regulation of the sector. Councils will benefit from the inspector's ability to address and resolve issues before they escalate, allowing them to focus on the business of delivering good decisions, services and outcomes for their communities. By raising the standard of conduct in the sector, the reputation of every local government is improved. Finally, our government has also focused on clarifying the roles of council members and CEOs to make it clear to everyone how the system of local government is to be run. Local government councils lead and guide your communities, decide how ratepayers' money is spent, and propose ideas to make your part of WA an even better place to live. So it is important for everyone running for election to understand what's involved in representing your community on council. For example, if you're elected to a local government area with wards, you don't just represent that ward, but the district as a whole. You have a responsibility to make decisions in the best interests of everyone. On council, a big part of your job involves finding consensus with other council members so you can make decisions that best address the issue under consideration. As Minister for Local Government, I know how important it is for candidates to be fully aware of the requirements of the role, what to expect, and the rules that apply to all candidates throughout and after the local government elections in October. This webinar today will provide you with the information you need to know at this point of your journey. Lastly, it is important that Council reflect the diversity of all people that live within their boundaries and more widely the state. Democracy is stronger when people of all backgrounds, life experiences, beliefs and skills put their hand up to participate. That is why I see it as so critical that diverse voices become part of our local councils so that the experiences of the whole community are heard around the table when decisions are made on the important services and facilities that our local governments deliver. If you are passionate about an issue, motivated to make a difference, or as someone who cares about your local community, I urge you to step up and nominate in your local government elections this year and encourage others of a like mind to do so also. Thank you again to our hosts WALGA and to the WA Electoral Commission and the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety for your presentations tonight. And for those of you considering running for council, I wish you all the best with your nominations and the campaign ahead. Good luck. I will now be exiting stage left so the Director General can come back.
Thank you,
so much.
Minister. Thank you. Thanks, Erin.
No worries. Thanks, Minister. I'm just going to gather myself together, sorry, and just work out where I was. I think I was just starting on
Elections.
Yep. Here we go.
Here we go.
Before you nominate. So I thought I'd just run through things you need to think about and things you need to do before nominating to become a councillor. The first thing is you need to complete the mandatory online induction on our website. You need to submit your nomination before the deadline. You have from Thursday the 28th of August to Thursday the 4th of September 2025 to complete this. It's important to note that late nominations are not accepted. Another thing to do and to be mindful of is to attend a candidate information session. So check in with your local government, as many host their own information sessions. As well as understanding the nomination and election process, you'll learn more about the role of council. You can also have a look at your local government's policies, plans, meeting minutes, community strategic plans and reports, and to get an understanding of the local government's priorities. Another thing to think about is to attend a council meeting or talk with your local council members. So there's lots of ways that you can engage with the council and find out a lot more about the council and their current priorities and things that they have in terms of what's the work program, as part of your process of thinking about nominating. All local governments do run a little differently, so it's a good idea to get an understanding of your local government's meeting procedures and opportunities for participation. Then, of course, you need to think about your campaign, draft your candidate profile, understand what platform you want to use to let your community know about yourself and your priorities that you're hoping will get you elected onto the council. Returning officers are the people responsible for conducting a local government's election, and so you will need to submit your application through the returning officer. It's also important to remember, don't leave everything to the last minute, because there can be issues with your application and things that might need clarifying, so make sure you get in early. Again, returning officers will not accept nominations after the closing date. So in terms of the induction, it is compulsory to complete this induction before nominating. It takes around 30 minutes to complete and gives you valuable information on a range of topics. Once you've completed the induction, you'll receive a registration number via email. It's really important to keep this email because you'll need it later on. So probably good to print a copy, and you'll need your unique registration number for your application. If you don't receive an email, please check your junk folder in your emails. If you still can't find it, please contact our advisory line and we can provide you with your registration number. Excuse me. These contact details will be provided to you at the end of the presentation, and the returning officer may request a copy of the email when you submit your application and your nomination. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, if we just turn to the candidate induction and the sorts of topics that are covered. So you can see on the screen, it's everything from the local government decision-making process, the role of council and local government employees in the community, what sort of decisions are made by council members, the qualities and skills that make an effective council member, information about the code of conduct, obligations regarding gifts, conflicts of interest and needing to declare if you're a successful council member, information on local government elections, candidate campaigns, remuneration you can expect to receive, which is set by the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal, which is, as you may or may not be aware, contingent on the band or class of the local government where you have successfully been elected, so it's not the same rate across the board. Information about why to stand for council and what you should do, and then support information that's available. So it's quite extensive in terms of the information covered, and I think you'll find that it's really essential in terms of giving you that foundation and grounding of lots of really critical information. So in terms of the Code of Conduct, the Local Government Model Code of Conduct regulations were introduced in February 2021, and they apply to all candidates and council members. So it's really important that you're familiar with the Code of Conduct. Once your nomination is accepted by the returning officer, the provisions of the Code of Conduct will apply if your candidacy is successful. Any alleged breach of protocol may only be addressed once you're elected. Candidates are expected to demonstrate professional and ethical behaviour throughout their campaigns. Complaints of minor breaches of the Code of Conduct are submitted to the local government and then forwarded on to the Local Government Standards Panel for determination. Serious breaches are investigated by the Department of Local Government Industry Regulation and Safety, it's our department, and the Director General can refer these matters to the State Administrative Tribunal or the Magistrates Court. So again, it's important to understand this information and understand how it applies to you. In terms of the Code of Conduct and what it covers, so Regulations 17 to 22 of the Code of Conduct cover the use and misuse of local government resources and information that you may have access to as a council member. Regulation 18 is very important and covers securing personal advantage or disadvantage over others. As a candidate, you must ensure your campaign follows the highest ethical standards and does not directly or indirectly cause detriment to a local government or any other person. You can't say anything you like about the council or other candidates. Regulation 19 prohibits involvement in the local government's administration, ensuring council members do not undertake tasks that contribute to the administration of the local government unless authorised by their local government or the CEO. And Regulation 20 covers the relationships with local government employees, including setting out the different functions and roles of council members compared with local government employees. It's important that you're familiar with the provisions on disclosure of information and interests covered in Regulations 21 and 22. These provisions cover managing confidential information that you may have access to and disclosing interests that could be perceived to adversely affect your decision-making process. So again, as I hope you can see, there's quite a lot of information there, but what we're hoping to do is to provide it to you in a way that's accessible and understandable and gives you a good grounding so that you feel you're across these really important matters before you kind of go through the process of nominating and then potentially being elected. Now, I'm just going to check in with Karen, timing-wise.
Yes.
Because I do have information on the Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 reforms as they relate to the elections, but I'm just wondering if you want me to...
I think we have time.
You have time?
We do have time,
Okay.
Erin. Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
At
Would be
any
good.
point, just sort of say wrap it up and I will. So you may or may not be aware that the first tranche of local government reforms was passed by Parliament in May 2023. And a lot of those reforms were very much about setting up new processes for the 2023 elections. So this included things like the number of electoral reforms that related to optional preferential voting, which the Minister referred to, parental leave for councillors, changes to special electors meetings, compliance exemptions, elections of mayors and presidents, owner and occupier roles, and backfilling extraordinary vacancies. So there was quite a lot of reforms in that first tranche that really set ourselves up for the 2023 elections, and as you'll see in a moment, we've got some further reforms that relate to the 2025 elections. So council members are now entitled to parental leave when they or their partner give birth, adopt a person under 16 years of age, or become the guardian or foster parent of a person under 16 years of age. Councils have now moved from council-elected mayors and presidents to popularly elected mayors and presidents. Owner-occupier roles may be supplied with a copy of district's owner and occupier role. It's important to know that if you are successful in the local government elections, you must delete or destroy your copy of the roll within 5 days following the announcement of the election results. And if you're elected to council, you must delete or destroy a copy within 5 days following the term of expiry or when you vacate the office. Backfilling of extraordinary vacancies can occur when a council member runs for the position of councillor and mayor or president. And if the candidate is successfully elected to the position of councillor and mayor or president, their councillor position becomes vacant. In these situations, we can fill the vacancy by local governments taking the next candidate who had the second highest number of votes. So rather than have to go out again through another process, the person who came second can be elected into that position. These new provisions apply to vacancies that occur within 12 months from the last ordinary local government election, and that's an important thing to understand as well. Because if it's after 12 months from the last ordinary local government election, it will require an extraordinary election to be held. So in terms of Tranche 2, I think Minister might have touched on this, superannuation contributions for council members. Bands and amounts are set by the WA Salaries and Allowance Tribunal, and councils can now decide if members are paid on a per meeting basis or by annual allowance. An ICT allowance can also be paid. Mayors or presidents and deputy mayors or presidents may also receive additional remuneration in recognition of the additional roles they play and fulfil. Council members are reimbursed for particular expenses associated with their role. This can include things like travel and childcare. Whether you are successful or unsuccessful, you can claim the first $1,000 of your campaign expenses as a tax deduction. New provisions to clarify roles and responsibilities for mayors and presidents, councillors and local government CEOs have also been brought in. The role of council is to lead and represent their communities. They do that by engaging with their community, making decisions and setting the local government's strategic direction. Elected governing body, which we call the council, is led by the mayor or president, and there are elections every 2 years. And as I just mentioned, this can also include extraordinary elections in certain circumstances throughout that term. The administrative arm of the local government is then responsible for implementing the decisions and plans made by the council. So it's very important to understand the distinct roles that the administration has versus the elected members of the council. So the administrative body is led by the CEO, who employs and manages staff, and they're responsible for delivery of services and other functions, and staff implement council's directions and decisions. So, reform changes for the October 2025 elections. Several Tranche 2 reform changes have been implemented and will apply for the October 2025 local government elections. The statewide caretaker period comes into place on the 4th of September to the declaration of the poll. This reform standardises a caretaker period across all local governments in WA. It prevents local governments from making significant decisions while an election is underway, particularly decisions that would bind a future council to a particular course of action. And you may be aware that this is very similar to the provisions that apply for the state government elections when the government enters into a caretaker period. The October 2023 local government elections also saw several councils require to reduce the number of council member representation with the introduction of reform provisions for council size. So a number of local governments will also be required to reduce their council member representation for the October 2025 local government elections. The owner and occupier roles, so the rules that manage voting eligibility for people occupying property, have also been tightened. The improved rules ensure that people wanting to vote in local government elections genuinely use the property they occupy and that the claim they make is for an appropriate place. Non-resident occupiers must show the following to make an enrolment claim. They have to continuously occupy the property in that local government under a lease or other legal instrument for at least 12 months prior to the claim. They must not be seeking to claim eligibility based on occupying a place of residence. They must exclusively occupy at least 10 square metres of eligible space. They must pay at least the minimum amount of rent prescribed for that local government. They must be able to secure the property from intruders and be genuinely using the property for their business. So in terms of, I'm nearly done. In terms of optional preferential voting, again, the Minister touched on this in her opening remarks. It's also used in the Australian state and federal government elections, so many of you would already be familiar with this process. So it gives the voters the option to vote for one candidate or number their preferences across other candidates. So you have those options. You only need to register a first preference on local government election ballot papers by placing a 1 in the square alongside the candidate of your choice for their votes to be counted. To register one or more additional preferences among the remaining candidates, voters can use consecutive numbers in the other candidate squares up to the number of vacancies to be filled. So you can either put a 1 just next to one person, or then 1, 2, 3, up to the number that are there. So finally, in terms of if you need to connect with our team, The information is provided up on the screen up there. So we have information on our website that you can access, and you can see the website details there. We've got the local government advisory line, and there's a phone number up on the screen, 1300 762 511. And we can provide guidance to any of the questions that you have through any of those processes. So really encourage people to reach out to us if you have questions or anything following this evening's webinar that you'd like to discuss or get further information on.
Thanks, Erin, very much. And there will be the opportunity with the Q&A at the end of tonight as well. So moving on to our next speakers. So we have Dennis Riley, Acting West Australian Electoral Commissioner, and Phil Richards, Manager of Election Events, who will provide an overview of the election process. Welcome, Dennis and Phil.
Thank you, and thanks, Karen, for the invitation to be here this evening and to speak all these to prospective councillors. And sounds like we've got a large number of them online too, which is fantastic. So a special thanks to you all for joining in tonight, and looking forward to you stepping up to serve your communities. That's a really big step. Your commitment to the public service and democracy is deeply appreciated. I was going to talk to you a little bit about the election process, just at a high level, a little bit about the support that we can provide you, and then my good colleague Phil will be able to take you through a bit more of that detail. So just the Electoral Commission's role. So we are ensuring that the elections are fair, transparent and accessible to all. It's one of our key points. For the elections we are conducting, we're committed to integrity, impartiality and professionalism at every stage of the election process. There are 4 key stages to the process. The candidate nominations, voter enrolment, polling day operations and the final count and results. Our expectations on candidates is to uphold the democratic principles and electoral integrity, and Erin's covered part of that already. Engage respectfully with your communities and within your community. Importantly, be professional, respectful with your returning officers, the local government authorities, your fellow candidates, to help maintain a fair and supportive environment for all that are going to be involved with the process. Follow the Local Government Act and the election guidelines, and Phil will talk a little bit more about that. And importantly, one of the key contacts will be your returning officer, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The returning officer is your lifeline. You really need to connect with them and connect with them early. The support from the WA Electoral Commission. So elections can be complex and quite demanding. So we're here to support you through that process. Our team is here with guidance and resources, both in person and online, to support you in your pursuits. And Phil will be covering the key topics on part of that journey in a moment. I thought just important to very briefly just touch on the special inquiry that you would have seen probably in the media, just because it's something that has affected the WA Electoral Commission. And I just want to let everyone online know that the WA Electoral Commission, we certainly acknowledge the release of that special inquiry report. We welcome the findings and the recommendations that are currently undertaking a thorough review of those. And under the current leadership I have in place now, we're implementing a number of improvements that you will start to see coming through very shortly, particularly around workforce planning, service delivery, training. So training is really important, particularly for our returning officers and those people that you interact with across the Commission, and also our community engagement. So there's some of probably the 4 key pillars that we're going to be working on with that special inquiry. In regards to the 2025 local government election, just the key dates. So the 22nd of August, the electoral roll closes. The 28th of August, nominations open, which is the most important. The 4th of September at 4 p.m, the nominations close, and obviously the 18th of October is our election day. In preparations, although we've experienced probably a few small delays on our side, we've now caught up, and preparations for the election are well underway. We're really pleased with the progress that we've made, and everything's remaining on track. We're working really closely across local government in WA. I've met many of them individually with WALGA.
Excuse me, Dennis, have you got slides?
No.
You haven't? Okay, that's fine.
No, just free really. Phil's got the slides.
Okay, just checking.
But I'm happy for my notes to be provided. And also the Department of Local Government, Industry and Regulation and Safety too. So we're all collaborating well together, I think. Also, the WAEC will be conducting at this stage 128 local government elections, so that's quite a number. Clearly that may change if some of those events don't actually go to election at the end, but 128, of which 120 will be postal and 8 will be in person. The WAC, we probably employ around about 1,000 staff to run those elections, so it's not an insignificant number of people that are required to help us run that election. And we're looking to send out about 1.87 million ballot packages. So that's a lot of packages that we need to get out to everybody to enable people to be able to vote. And we estimate around about 640,000 or so will be returned to us as well. So I think the indications are that we'll see an increase in electoral participation. So that's really promising too. And our goal is a smooth, secure and accessible voting experience for all electors. Almost finally, just the results. So everyone will be really can't wait to get the results, and we'll start counting those results at 6 p.m. on the 18th of October, so on election day. And we'll also be doing all that we can to turn that result around really, really quickly. It is possible that some of the results may not be called on the night and declared. Instead, it could be on the Sunday or the Monday. But we will be doing all that we can to turn that around very, very quickly for everyone that'll be waiting on the results. Ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the count is paramount, and to be honest, would surpass trying to turn something around really, really quickly. We want to make sure that the result is completely done with integrity. So we appreciate your patience through that process. I understand it can be difficult, and we'll advise you of any change in timeframes as we work our way through. So before I hand over to Phil, just want to wish you all the very best with your campaign. I hope it really goes well. Thank you for being a part of the process. Good luck. I'll hand over to my colleague Phil, our manager of electoral events, and he'll take you through a bit of a slide presentation now.
Thanks, Dennis. Good evening, everybody. My name's Phil Richards, manager of election events, and in this presentation we'll cover various aspects of the election process, including eligibility to be a candidate, the nomination process, postal voting, both for postal and in-person elections, voting, and election day and election night. So as mentioned, we've got the returning officers, key contact if you're nominated as a candidate. They are person authorised to conduct the election. If the West Australian Electoral Commission is responsible for the conduct of the election, the Electoral Commissioner appoints the returning officer. If the local government is running the election themselves, then the CEO is the returning officer. Your returning officer will obviously take your nomination, answer any questions you have, try to resolve simple complaints, supervise the count, decide if ballot papers are formal or informal, authorise a recount if required, and declare the result. So please make use of them. They're there to help you, but also to make sure that the election follows the rules. So nominations, nominating for election, qualifications for election to council, covered under section 2.19 of the Local Government Act 1995. So you've got to be 18 years of age or over, enrolled as elector of the district. However, as mentioned previously, but not as a nominee of a body corporate. So if your only entitlement on the roll for that district is a nominee of a body corporate, then yes, you can vote, but you can't stand as a candidate. Must have completed the mandatory course, Local Government Candidate Induction, located on the Department of Local Government Industry Regulation and Safety official website. And not to be a candidate in another election for council, so you can't stand for two councillor positions. However, you can nominate for both the Mayor President and councillor if there is a popularly elected Mayor President election happening in conjunction with the councillor. Some of the disqualifications for membership: not a member of either state or federal parliament, is a bankrupt or a person whose affairs are under insolvency laws, and that's according to the Interpretation Act 1984, section 13D. Convicted of a crime and in prison serving a sentence for that crime. Convicted in the preceding 5 years of a serious local government offence. So a serious local government offence means an offence against the Local Government Act 1995 for which the offender could be sentenced to imprisonment or could be sentenced to pay a fine of exceeding $10,000. Convicted of an offence for which an indictable penalty was imprisonment for more than 5 years, an elected member of another local government, or disqualified because of misapplication of local government funds or property. So what is needed to make an effective nomination? You needed to, as mentioned, completed the course titled Local Government Candidate Induction on the Department of Local Government Industry Regulation Safety official website. You need to have that print out acknowledgement email, which also provides the reference number and the date of completion. A completed nomination form, including providing the reference number and the date of the completion of the online candidate induction. So that needs to go on the nomination form, so that's why you need that printout email. Your candidate profile, a deposit of $100, nomination deposit, cash, money order, bank cheque or credit card. It can also be EFT as long as it's credited to the local government before the close of nominations. There's also some, you can have additional information that a candidate considers relevant to their candidature, so that's optional. And all that received by the returning officer before the close of nominations at 4 p.m. on Thursday the 4th of September. So for those local governments, the 128 that are using the West Australian Electoral Commission, we have our online nomination builder to assist candidates to prepare their nomination form, their profile, the additional information, and upload their photograph online. So it's been updated for this election, so now the additional information is part of the online nomination builder. You cannot, however, nominate online. So basically the nomination builder will allow the West Australian Electoral Commission to forward the profile information direct to the printer without having to re-key it in. So we ensure that the information that we send is printed as part of the election packages as how it's written by the candidate. So you need to provide your nomination ID to the returning officer when you meet with the returning officer to lodge your nomination. And Nomination Builder is available on the West Australian Electoral Commission's website at the moment. And at last count on Friday, I think there was about 120 odd nominations sitting in there. So that's good to see that some candidates have been using it. The candidate profile, you must have a candidate profile. It is a requirement. It's not more than 1,000 characters, including spaces. It must be in the English language. Biographical information about yourself, the candidate, your statement of your policies and beliefs. It, however, cannot contain information that the returning officer considers to be false, misleading or defamatory. You can also have a passport-sized photograph, which is optional, of the candidate. It needs to be head or head and shoulders, not less than 6 months old, or if it is older than that, as long as the returning officer considers the photograph shows a reasonable likeness of the candidate. And on part of your profile, you must have at least one personal contact point, and that can be an email address, can be a phone number, it can be an address, but then you must have at least one contact detail on your profile. So the additional information, again, this is optional. Again, it has to be in the English language, not more than 2,000 characters, including spaces. This information, additional information that a candidate considers relevant to their candidature. Again, not to contain any information that the returning officer considers to be false, misleading or defamatory. And this will only be published on the relevant local government official website. It's not included in the election packages that goes out to the electors. The profile is, but the additional information is not. So electoral rolls, available on nomination for the ward or the district that you're contesting. Mayoral candidate, if it's you're contesting a mayoral vacancy or a presidential vacancy, are entitled to the whole district role. If you're a councillor and you're going for a ward, if your local government has wards, you're entitled to that ward's role. So they're free to all candidates and sitting members on request. Copy of both the residents' roll and a copy of the owners and occupiers' roll. So it's been mentioned before, but the destruction and deletion of copies of the rolls brought in just before the 2023 election. A receipt must, before the end of the relevant period, provide to either the Electoral Commissioner or a CEO a statutory declaration confirming that every supplied copy has either been destroyed or permanently deleted from any computer, device or medium or other storage system. So the relevant period, it's been mentioned before, for a candidate that's unsuccessfully and not elected, 5 working days after the result of the election is declared. For a candidate that has been elected, 5 working days after the term of office ends or if the office becomes vacant. And if a member who's not a candidate gets a copy of the roll, the term of their current office ends, or again if the office becomes vacant. So the statutory declaration must identify the election, include a description of every supplied copy, including whether the supplied copy was in an electronic form. In relation to every supplied copy, the steps described taken to destroy it or delete it permanently. Penalty for this is a fine of $5,000 and a daily penalty of a fine of $50 for each day or part of during which the offence continues. So very steep penalty for failure to supply that statutory declaration and destroy the rolls. Postal voting for postal elections, the mail out of election packages. The election packages will be lodged with Australia Post commencing on Friday the 12th of September for country local governments. Election packages to be lodged with Australia Post commencing on Wednesday the 17th of September for metropolitan local governments. And as been mentioned, about 1.87 million will be lodged over that period. So not all the country will be lodged on the 12th of September. That's the starting day. It will run through for a few days, and the metropolitan definitely, or roughly just over the million mark or whatever, won't be lodged on Wednesday the 17th. So that will be done progressively over multiple days. If we hit Australia Post with 1.87 million on one day, they wouldn't be able to handle it anyway. So we stagger that over multiple days. So as a candidate, unlike state and federal election, where a lot of the campaigning is done on election day, you should maximise your campaign around the delivery of the election packages. So return of the voting packages, they can be posted to the returning officer using the supplied reply paid envelope, so it doesn't cost the electors any money, or you can hand deliver them to your local government office. There'll be a ballot box at the local government office which you can bring in and hand deliver it. For those that we receive from Australia Post, we have return numbers that Australia Post give us, and we'll post those totals on the West Australian Electoral Commission website daily, so you can get an idea of how the returns are coming through. So again, we always say roughly 50% of the packages that are going to come back are returned within the first 5 business days, and that was the same for 2023 as well. So as I said, you want to maximise your campaign around the delivery of the election packages, not wait a couple of weeks and start your campaign, because potentially 50% of those that are going to vote have already voted. And your completed packages are returned to the returning officer, care of the West Australian Electoral Commission. There's also for in-person elections, the 8 that we're doing plus the other 10 that we're not doing are in-person elections. So there is postal voting, but it's by application. So those electors who have applied for a postal vote will be sent their election package as soon as practical around the publication of the election notice. And again, the return postal votes can be posted to the returning officer using the supplied reply paid envelope, or again, hand delivered to the local government office. Postal voting, a couple of the candidate rules. A candidate or their representative cannot assist the elector to mark their ballot paper. Again, we've got a penalty for that of imprisonment for 12 months and a fine of $12,000. And another one is a candidate or representative cannot take custody of an envelope in which there is a postal vote. And the penalty for that is imprisonment for 24 months and a fine of $24,000. So again, very stiff penalties for those offences. The issue of replacement and provisional voting papers. So these are extra packages, papers that we send out to the local government. So if electors haven't received their package, or the kids have got it and scribbled on it and ripped it up, or the dog's eaten it, or in the case of many country local governments, snails love our election packages. If they're sitting in the mailbox for a couple of days, they get chewed up. So the local government will issue replacement provisional voting papers from the day after the mail out through to the 18th of October. So you can get full or a partial package can be replaced. So if it's want a ballot paper replaced, you can get that replaced. And provisional voting papers, so these are issued to people who claims to have been omitted from the electoral roll in error. However, you need proof of omission is required, so you need to be able to supply proof that you have been left off the roll in error. In-person voting, early voting. So again, this is just relevant for the in-person elections. Will commence as soon as practical after the publication of the election notice, and we proposed publication on the 19th of September. So probably from Monday the 22nd of September. The early voting venues and times will be published in the election notice, and early voting closes at 4 p.m. on Friday 17th of October, the day before election day at 4 p.m. Election day itself, for in-person elections, so electors can vote at any polling place on election day in their district. For postal elections, there's still polling places open, so that's for electors can drop off their completed postal vote at any polling place on election day. So you don't actually rock up to vote, you can hand in your completed postal voting papers, or if you haven't got them, you can then get a replacement and vote at the polling place on election day. So there's at least one polling place, and generally it's the chief polling place, will be open between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. in the district, and there could be other polling places can be open for different hours. Close of poll, election day, after 6 p.m, the ballot boxes are opened and counting of votes commences. Again, it's been mentioned before, there's optional preference voting for local government elections in West Australia. Scrutineers can observe the counting of the votes. The count may continue into Sunday and could also possibly include a recount. The returning officer may declare the results on a day after election day, that's been mentioned, might not be able to declare on the Saturday night depending on how the count's going. And the results are posted both onto the local government's website and onto the Commission's website, and that's at elections.wa.gov.au. Some essential information for candidates. Your refunded deposit, yes, you can get your $100 back if you're lucky enough. So they are refunded to any candidate that's been elected, or any non-elected candidate who receive at least 5% of the total number of first preference votes included in the count. Some general information about electoral advertising: handbills, pamphlets, notices, letters, and other printed articles must have the name and address of the person authorising it, and also the name and the address of the printer. And these addresses must not be a PO post office box, must be a physical address. All online election material requires the name and address of the person authorising the material. And I suggest you also refer to the local government's bylaws regarding election signage or local laws, and because they may include some information about where you can place your election signage. There's some local governments, local laws that have restrictions on the placement. Scrutineers, they're appointed by the candidate. There's an appointment form. There's some of their rights that you have as scrutineers: to enter and to be in a polling place at any time before the close of the poll, observe the conduct of the election, observe checking of postal voting papers, and to be present after the close of the poll and observe all proceedings of the count. However, there are some restrictions. Not to be in a polling place if another scrutineer appointed by the same candidate is also there, except unless they're casting or delivering their own vote. Not to take part in the conduct of elections, and again, including taking custody of postal votes, and not to record the names of persons obtaining ballot papers. That's more for the in-person elections. Bringing up the electoral gifts register, the West Australian Electoral Commission is not responsible for the gifts register, so any inquiries go to the CEO. So we've just got some information provided to assist you yourselves. So the CEO maintains the electoral gifts register, which is available for public viewing. An up-to-date version of the electoral gifts register is to be published on the local government's official website. The disclosure is to be made to the CEO on the prescribed form, and that's the Form 9A of the regulations. So there's been a change from the 2023. So previously both the candidate and the donor had to disclose any gift of $300 or more. Now it's just the candidate. So this is a change from the that's just come into effect. So just the candidate must disclose any gift of $300 or more, or 2 or more gifts made by one person totaling $300 or more, promised or received within the 6-month period prior to election day. So this can include money, gifts, discounts and provision of services. So some general information: as a candidate, you must not receive a gift during the period set out, that's 6 months before election day, unless the name and address of each donor are known to the candidate. So you must actually know who the gift has been given from. No anonymous brown paper bags of $300 left on your doorstep. So again, penalty, a fine of $10,000 for accepting a gift where you don't know who the donor is. Candidate must disclose to the CEO a gift promised or received during the period set out from the 6 months through. Again, the penalty is a fine of $10,000 if you haven't disclosed that. So when you do your disclosure, so any gifts received or promised prior to you actually nominating, you must be disclosed within 3 days of you actually doing your nomination. So any gifts that has been received from the 18th of April through to when you nominate, you must disclose within 3 days of you actually nominating. And any further gifts received or promised after you've actually nominated must be disclosed within 3 days of receipt. So again, penalty for making a disclosure, not making a disclosure within the time period is a fine of $10,000 and a daily penalty of a fine of $500. So the disclosure period commences 6 months before the relevant election day, so again 18th of April 2025, and concludes for unsuccessful candidates 3 days after election day, and for successful candidates on the start day for financial interest returns under section 5.74 of the Local Government Act. And the disclosure of gifts forms must be kept on the electoral gifts register for the period of 4 years after the relevant election day.
All right.
And thank you, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dennis and Phil. So we will,
let the panel.
yeah, okay, we'll now move on to Mr. Brown. So up next we have Tony Brown, the Executive Director of Member Services at WALGA, to speak to the purpose of local government and the role of an elected member, and there's no one that knows it better. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, President Chappel. In this presentation, we'll discuss what you can expect if you're elected as a council member. So that's what you're getting yourself into. We're going to cover that for you. Elected members are required to complete the Council Members Essentials Training, which is 5 courses in the first 12 months of once they've been elected. The key competencies covered in that training is the backbone of this presentation tonight. Understanding local government and understanding the legislative basis for local government is the foundation for understanding how local governments operate and the scope of services they provide. We always like to, when we're giving a presentation on local government, do a snapshot of the industry, and this slide shows that local government is a substantial industry in the WA economy. There's 139 local governments with over 1,100 elected members representing communities throughout the state, including Cocos, Keeling Islands and Christmas Islands, and local governments employ over 25,000 people. The local government sector contributes significantly to the state economy with $4.9 billion in expenditure annually and is responsible for management of $52 billion in assets. Bearing in mind that local government's original formation was as a roads board, it is significant that to this day local governments continue to manage the vast majority of the state's road network, with 87% of public roads under the care, control and management of local government. So the basis for local government in WA, it's good to understand that local governments are created under residual powers retained by each Australian state upon federation. For this reason, no mention of local government is made in the Australian Constitution. All matters regarding local government are determined through the legislative powers of each state's parliament. Therefore, the Western Australian Constitution Act of 1889 requires the state legislature to maintain a system of local government and to provide local governments with powers considered necessary for the good government of each local government district. This is why it's often said that local government is a creature of the state. The state achieves this through the Local Government Act 1995, which establishes each local government district and provides for the creation of local governments as body corporates. The Act further establishes the role and responsibilities of the Council, led by a Mayor or President, and the separate role of the CEO as the leader of the administration. The Act is based on the principle of general competence, which means a local government can make any decision it believes is in the best interest of its community, provided the decision is consistent with legislation or common law. Local governments provide a diverse range of services, generally falling under the general headings of people, property and regulatory services, and we've got some examples on the screen there. Consistent with the general competency principle, the Local Government Act does not specifically set out the services that must be provided. Instead, local governments can, under general competence powers, choose to provide a wide range of services to meet the unique needs of its own community, including recreation services and facilities, arts and culture, functions and events, youth, family and aged care services are some examples. However, there are many services, particularly aligned with regulatory and property services, that local governments must do under other legislation, including land use planning, development and building approvals, and undertaking things like swimming pool inspections. Now we're going to have a look at serving on council and the Local Government Act provisions that define the different and separate roles and responsibilities of the elected council and the local government administration. So there is a clear distinction between the role and responsibility of the council and those of the CEO were established in the Local Government Act 1995 and have been affirmed and clarified through the 2024 Local Government Amendment Act. The Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Hannah Beazley, provided these statements to Parliament as part of her second reading speech for the Local Government Amendment Bill 2024. So role clarity is vital for all who participate in local government, requiring the different roles to work together to achieve shared objectives. When people understand their roles, better decisions can be made and implemented more effectively, resulting in better outcomes for your community. We'll now look at how the Act quite deliberately defines different roles for the council, council members and the administration led by the CEO. So the Act states that the role of the council is to govern the local government's affairs and to be responsible for the performance of the local government's functions. The council's role also includes determining the services and facilities to be provided by the local government, determining the local government's policies, planning strategically for the future of the district, selecting the Chief Executive Officer and reviewing the CEO's performance, and providing the CEO with strategic direction. The recent Act amendments put additional focus on the separation of roles between the council as the governing body and the CEO's executive role. You'll see on the slide there that council must have regard to the following principles. The council's governing role is separate from the CEO's executive role, and council respects that separation. Council must make decisions on the basis of evidence, merit, and according to written law, taking into account the local government's finances and resources. And council must have regard to the need to support an organisational culture for the local government that promotes the respectful and fair treatment of the local government's employees. The final requirement on the slide reflects council and council member obligations under work health and safety regulations and clearly shows that the council has a role in setting the culture of an organisation. Now we'll look at the role of councillors. So here's the role of a councillor extracted from the Act, requiring council members to fill a representative role, representing the interests of not only residents and ratepayers, but also other persons who work or visit the district. Council members are also required to fulfil a communication role to community about local government matters and a role of participating in decision making. Really importantly, councillors do not have individual powers. It is the council that makes decisions at formal council meetings. Now we look at the role of the Mayor or President. So in addition to the councillor role, the Mayor or President has additional obligations related to the role of leadership of the council and the community, including providing leadership and guidance to council and council members, including on their roles and responsibilities, acting as the principal spokesperson for the local government and carrying out civic and ceremonial duties on behalf of the local government, at all times acting consistently with council decisions. Presiding at council meetings, ensuring meetings are orderly and conducted in accordance with the Act, and promoting, facilitating and supporting positive and constructive working relationships amongst council members, and liaising with the CEO on the local government's affairs and the performance of its functions. Now we look at the role of the CEO, and it's really important to understand that the CEO is council's only employee. The CEO acts as the principal advisor to the council and implements the council decisions and policies. So this slide outlines the CEO's role and responsibilities as the leader of the local government administration. The CEO's role is operational in nature as compared to the Council's governing and strategic role and the Councillor's representative role. These functions can only be performed by the CEO or by staff under the direction of the CEO. So earlier we saw that the Council determines the services and facilities to be provided by the local government, and on this slide, as under the role of the CEO, we see the CEO is responsible for managing the provision of services and facilities that the Council has determined the local government will provide. I also want to highlight that the CEO is responsible for the employment management, supervision, direction and dismissal of all other employees. So this slide brings things together. So respecting the separate roles of council and the administration is fundamental to the proper functioning of a local government. Where the two halves of the local government entity work collaboratively, they can deliver great outcomes for the community. Now we're going to have a look back at the role of a councillor and bring to life the way in which you'll perform the three roles listed on the screen here. So your role on council represents the interest of electors, ratepayers and residents of the district. So if you are elected to council, your first obligation before you can act in your elected office will be signing this declaration. By signing this declaration, you're making a commitment to represent the interests of all the people in the district, faithfully, honestly and with integrity through your office on council, and that you will observe the code of conduct in doing so. Now we look at participating in decision making. The most important role a councillor plays is that of a decision maker at formal council meetings. Listed here is a range of typical matters dealt with at a council meeting. Your decision-making function is so important that the Local Government Act states that all council members who are present at a meeting must vote. The Act further states that council must make its decisions on the basis of evidence, on the merits and in accordance with the law, taking into account the local government's finances and resources. The only time that you won't vote is if you have a declaration of interest, and we're going to cover that in a few more slides. Facilitates communication within the community. So if you are elected, it's very likely that you will receive communications direct from the residents by phone, by email, and when meeting people in the community. On the screen there is a good example of a councillor receiving an inquiry that relates to an operational matter. It could be a pothole in the road, a broken swing at the playground or a barking dog. We now know that operational matters are the role of the CEO and the administration. So the council member's role is to advise the community that the matter is required to be addressed by the administration, with the councillor forwarding the details so the administration can take care of the matter. Okay, the next topic is meeting procedures. So the important work of a council occurs at formal council meetings where legally binding decisions are made. Council and committee meetings are formal meetings convened and conducted in accordance with the Local Government Act, regulations and meeting procedures local laws. Committee meetings differ from council meetings as in most cases, committees only make recommendations to council and the council will make the decision. Effective formal meetings and well-informed decisions are supported by informal meetings, agenda briefing forums and workshops which provide an opportunity to prepare for formal decision making, ask and answer questions, share information, build knowledge and understanding and develop strategy and concepts. Informal meetings are an opportunity for council members, the CEO and the local government's professional staff to work collaboratively and build consensus. The Local Government Act and regulations provide the requirements for council meetings, including that the Mayor or President is to preside, defining a quorum, when a meeting may be closed to the public and requirements for voting. The procedural detail for meetings is currently defined by each local government in their meeting procedures or standing orders local law. However, as part of the Local Government Act reforms, these individual local laws will soon be replaced by standardised meeting procedures. The CEO is the principal advisor to the Council and is responsible for preparing meeting agendas that include detailed reports and recommendations from the professional staff employed by the local government. Council members are required to read the information provided in an agenda and ask questions of the administration to ensure they're well informed and prepared to participate in decision making at the meeting. Following each meeting, it's the CEO's role to implement council decisions. Public participation and broadcasting. So the Local Government Act provides for the rights of the community to be involved in council meetings, including the public have a right to attend meetings, and every council meeting has time set aside for public questions. Class 1 and 2 local governments, which are the larger local governments, are required to live broadcast their meetings, and Class 3 and 4 local governments must audio record their meetings, with all local governments required to publish these recordings on their websites. The public have a right to access the agenda before the meeting and to access council and committee meeting minutes. The public can even call a special meeting of electors where they can raise one or more matters for council's attention. Quick quiz question. Asking you, at a council meeting, I can exercise my freedom of speech and make any comment that I wish. Is that true or false? The statement is, of course, false. A Member of Parliament has parliamentary privilege under which they are completely immune from legal action based on their statements during parliamentary proceedings. This means Members of Parliament cannot be sued for defamation for anything they say in Parliament, even if it is false, malicious or damaging. However, a council member has qualified privilege, which gives only limited protection from lawsuits and only applies if the council member has acted in good faith and in performance of a function under the Act or under any other written law. The Model Code of Conduct, so the Local Government Act provisions relating to the meeting are not just about procedures. Erin spoke earlier about the Code of Conduct provisions which are listed here, which impose behavioural and conduct obligations for council members when participating in council and committee meetings. Abiding by the Code of Conduct is not only an ethical obligation, as any failure to meet these behaviour standards may result in a formal complaint process. All right, we're now up to conflicts of interest. And this is a really important section. The most important function you'll perform in your time on council is that of a decision maker, and the community expects that local government decisions will be free from bias. Therefore, local government legislation includes limitations which, if they apply to you, will exclude you from participating in formal meetings and from voting on certain matters. So the Act prescribes 4 categories of conflict of interest. Going from the left-hand side of the slide, a direct financial interest will exist when you or a person closely connected to you stands to receive a direct financial benefit or suffer a financial detriment if council decides a matter in a certain way. An indirect financial interest is where you or a person closely connected to you has a financial relationship with a person or entity that requires a council decision. For this type of financial interest, there's no requirement for financial benefit or detriment, only that a financial relationship exists. A proximity interest arises where you or a person closely associated with you has an interest in land that adjoins or is directly opposite any land that is the subject to a council decision on a planning, zoning or development matter. Then this brings us to, on the far right-hand side, impartiality interests. These are a non-financial interest which could or could reasonably be perceived to adversely affect your impartiality in a matter. Impartiality interests can arise from friendships, family ties, memberships and other types of association. What is really important is that if you have a direct financial or an indirect financial or a proximity interest in a matter before council, you must disclose the interest and you're not permitted to participate in any part of the decision-making process. So you can't have discussion or vote on the item, and you'll be required to leave the council chamber before the debate begins. If you have an impartiality interest, you must disclose it at the meeting. However, you're not required to leave the chamber. You're permitted to participate in debate, and if present, you must vote on the matter. All right. It's appreciated that you may wear many hats in your local community. Although you may already wear many different hats, if you're elected, your community will always see you as a council member, regardless of which hat you believe you may be wearing. Our advice is that you should always consider your obligations to declare and manage conflicts of interest from the perspective that you are always a councillor. Quickly moving on to the last module, which is understanding financial reports and budgets. To participate effectively in the council's responsibility for oversight of the local government's financial performance, council members need to understand financial reports and budgets in the unique legislative arrangements that apply to local government accounting and obligations for strategic planning and delivery of community services. The foundation for local government financial planning is a council plan, currently referred to as a strategic community plan. The council determines the council plan through the community consultation and analysis of a range of data to determine the local government's strategic priorities to meet community needs. A robust strategic planning process is central to a local government meeting its statutory function, providing for the good government of persons in the district. There's a lot on this slide, but a council plan incorporates prioritised outcomes from a range of informing strategies that will vary between local governments, reflecting each community's unique characteristics and needs. Council plans are not one size fits all, and there is great variety from one local government to the next. The output of the council plan is the 4-year corporate business plan, which directly informs the local government's annual budget process. Council plans are not set and forget. There's a regular cycle of review and renewal which ensures the plan remains aligned to community expectations and, importantly, the local government's finance and resource capacity. Support for council members. So there are many ways local government legislation supports council members. As mentioned earlier, the WA Salaries and Allowances Tribunal determines meeting fees or annual allowances payable to council members to remunerate for the time spent in preparing for and attending council and committee meetings. The tribunal determines a range of fees. You should ask your local government administration what the fees for your local government are. The Local Government Act also permits the reimbursement of expenses incurred in performing your council member role, including childcare costs, including due to attendance at meetings. Also mentioned previously is that superannuation for council members has been adopted by many councils and will be compulsory for Class 1 and Class 2 local governments from October 2025. Also, new parental leave provisions entitle council members to 6 months leave when they or their spouse or de facto partner gives birth, adopts or fosters a child. There's also new provisions allow for payment of fees and reimbursement of expenses for attending mandatory training and continuing professional development. Elected members can get advice and guidance from their local government. That should be their first port of call, the local government CEO, as well as from WALGA and as well as from the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety. That is my presentation, President.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentations for this evening. So we'll now move into the Q&A segment where we'll address some of the questions that have come through during the webinar. And after that, we'll open to any additional questions you may have. Facilitating this part of the session is Facility Felicity Morris, Manager of Governance and Procurement at WALGA. Felicity will be joined by representatives from each of the presenting organisations who have been here this evening. So I will vacate the chair for Erin, is it? Erin, you coming? Erin.
Thank you, President Chappel. While Erin takes her seat, I will just let the audience know we have had quite a few questions come through already this evening. If you are looking for the Q&A function, it's in the bottom menu towards the right-hand side. So we'll answer as many questions as we can now, but any remaining questions we'll take on notice and publish written responses on the website together with this recording. Okay, so to get us started, Tony, we've had a question. How much time should I expect to commit to my council member responsibilities each week?
Thanks, Felicity. Good question, and comes up a lot when we go around from local government to local government at these forums. So the time commitment's going to vary between local governments and elected members. So time commitments can be best understood by looking at how often a council and committee meetings are held and how long the meetings run for. Have a look to see if your local government holds agenda briefing sessions and regular concept or strategic forums. Also have a look at when your council meetings are scheduled, how detailed the agenda is, how many pages does it contain. That will give you a bit of an idea of how much reading you're going to need to do. And you may also be putting yourself forward to represent the local government on some community groups, boards and committees. So yes, you can expect that being a council member will have an impact on your available time. So just make sure you're well informed about the extent of that impact before you nominate.
Thanks, Tony. Erin, we've had a couple of questions about the candidate induction course come in. So firstly, is it available to complete? And secondly, if I completed the candidate induction in 2023, do I need to do it again?
Thanks, Felicity. Yes, the induction course is available. It's on the Local Government Industry Regulations Safety's website, and we had those website details up on the slide, but we can certainly flick those up again for people. So you can, and if you have any problems navigating to that or finding on our website, you can ring our number that was on the screen as well. If you completed the candidate course for induction in 2023, no. If you completed it, which was available on our website after the 30th of June 2023, you do not need to complete the course again. You are required to declare the date you completed the course, and you need to provide that reference number on your nomination form, which I talked about during my presentation. As a refresher, and so that you have recent details available, we recommend you complete the course again though prior to nominating for this election. It's one of those things, as I sort of pointed out before, there's quite a lot of information in it, and I don't know, I can speak for myself personally, just doing something once and then doing it a second time, you often pick up different bits of information. So we certainly encourage you to do it again, even though you might not have to.
Thanks, Erin. Bill, we've had quite a few questions around campaign material. So firstly, I'm uncomfortable sharing my home address. Do I really need to include that address in the authorised by statement?
Yeah, thanks Felicity. Yes, it is a requirement under section 4.87 of the Local Government Act 1995 to have actual address. You need to supply an address. It cannot be a PO box, as mentioned, and non-compliance may be subject to a penalty of $5,000. Yes, you must have an address. That's a physical address.
Thanks, Bill. And a follow-up on that one, if it's printed material, but the candidate is using an online printing service, how would they go about providing the address of the printer?
So if they're printing it themselves, doing a photocopy themselves or printing themselves, then they would put themselves as the printer if they're printing the material. If they're going to a snap printing or something like that, they would put snap printing their name and the address of the printer. So yeah, if they're printing it themselves, then they would be the printer. So it would be their name and address as the person authorising it, if that's who's authorising it, and themselves as the name and address of the printer.
Thanks, Phil. Tony, I might come back to you. A question about a candidate who has a lot of commitments in the community. If they're elected to council, can they continue to serve on other committees and community groups?
Thanks, Felicity. Yes, absolutely. It's really common, particularly in smaller communities. And in these circumstances, that's going to be important for council members who are also office bearers or an executive committee member of that group to manage any conflict of interest that may come up. So they might have an impartiality interest from time to time, but certainly we would encourage them, you know, to still be part of their community groups, and they can be an elected member as well.
Thanks, Tony. Erin, we have a couple more questions about council member essentials training. So firstly, does a council member need to complete the training if they've completed it before?
Yes, a council member, well, yes, the answer to the question is if they've completed it before, and if they undertook and passed the training in a period of 5 years ending immediately before the day they are elected, they don't have to. So it depends a little bit on when it was completed. The council member also is not required to complete it if they have completed a diploma of local government elected member within the period 5 years ending immediately prior. So basically, if you've done either the essentials training or the diploma in local government elected within the 5 years prior to the day on which they're elected, they don't have to do it again. They don't have to do it.
Thanks, Erin. Phil, another question around electoral materials and authorisation statements. So how do I include an authorisation statement on social media publications?
Okay, so social media used to publish election material is required to comply with the authorised by, so again the name and address of the person who authorises it. You don't have it, the printer, it's just the name and address of the person authorising it. So any advertising on the internet, such as banner ads, must also be authorised. Website or Facebook site created with the electioneering purposes needs to be authorised, and that can be done on the home or the landing page. However, individual comments on social media do not need authorisation. And potentially some people may wish to create a separate social media profile for your campaigning. For that will allow you to separate that from your normal one for monitoring it and things like that. So yeah, if you want to create a separate one, it's probably a good idea to do that.
Great, thanks, Phil. I might stay with you if that's okay. We've had a couple of questions around the candidate profile and additional information.
Yep.
So firstly, could you clarify the character limit, so 1,000 characters versus 2,000 characters?
Okay.
And is the candidate's name and contact information included in that character limit?
Okay. So the profile, which accompanies the postal votes, is 1,000 characters, including spaces, And no, it doesn't include the name of the candidate. It's not, all your contact details aren't part of that 1,000 characters. So they will appear. It's the wording in the profile. The additional information, which is the 2,000 character, including spaces, that is optional. You don't have to provide that. And as mentioned, it only gets placed on the local government's website. Whatever you put in that, if you put your name and things like that, it does get included in that additional information. So it's only the profile where your candidate's name and your contact details aren't included in the 1,000 characters, but the additional information, whatever information is that you put forward in that, it's the 2,000 characters. It's included in 2,000 characters, including spaces.
Thanks, Phil. Erin, we've had a question about the reforms and the changes to eligibility for occupiers. So the question is, do those eligibility changes only apply to new applications to be on the roll?
Thanks, Felicity. So the eligibility requirements apply to all new owner-occupier enrolment applications. However, any previously accepted claims expire 6 months after the second ordinary election, or in the lease or right to occupy, the property ends. In addition, local governments may assess claims periodically. That's a little bit of a technical one.
Thanks, Erin. Tony, we have a lot of questions from people keen to get going. So the question is there a time when I can start campaigning or when I have to stop campaigning?
You can start campaigning now. So there's no restriction on people campaigning now, and then they would do that right up until close of poll at 6 p.m. on the Saturday, the 18th of October.
Thanks, Tony. And in a similar vein, Phil, we've had a few questions about how to go about making an appointment to nominate and how people find out the contact information for their returning officer.
Okay, so the returning officer's name and contact details will be available on the Commission's website. We're conducting some training with our returning officers at the moment. So, yeah, they will appear. I would say towards the end of this week or early next week, we'll have the names and contact details of the returning officers. So you go on the Commission's website, select your local government. At the moment, we have all the vacancies and listed, and then the returning officers' details will appear once the returning officers have conducted their training, which is ongoing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you to the panel. That's probably all the questions that we have time for this evening, but as I said, we will take the remaining questions on notice and provide written responses that we'll publish on the website together with this recording. So on that note, I will hand back to President Chappel to close the webinar.
Thanks, Felicity. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you, all our guests this evening. It's been really great. There's been a lot of information. Even I've learnt some new stuff. So tell me, before I go, Phil, who does the stacked deck get delivered to 5 days afterwards?
It's either going to be lodged with the CEO or the Electoral Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. So I didn't have time to do. So thanks, everybody. If you still have a question that hasn't been answered, please email governance@walga.asn.au or contact the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety. Get my head around it, LGIRS. So thanks, everybody, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.